Hey everyone, we are just 3 or 4 weeks away from the start of a new decade, winding down 2019 and getting ready for 2020. But you don't have to wait to get a jump start on your goals and your New Year's resolutions and what you want to accomplish next year. Every day we make hundreds or thousands of choices. Some of them seem very insignificant, little choices. But those choices cumulatively create our future and they help us achieve more in our life. We make our choices and then our choices make us. We can choose our thoughts, our mindset, our attitude, our values, and our actions. But we cannot outrun the consequences of those choices, either positive or negative. They're either serving us or they're fighting against what we want to accomplish every single day. But you don't have to wait to start your decade to get a jump start on that. And what I've found is one of the most powerful things in helping me accomplish my goals is a very intentional first few minutes of the day. I have a very intentional morning routine, and I've created a series of motivational planning journals that will help you incorporate this routine into your day and accomplish your goals and get a jump start. So head on over to riastory.com/journals. You can learn about my motivational planning journals. There's 6 in the series, and each one has a little bit of a different theme. So you could choose a theme of joy and abundance and gratitude. You can choose a theme that's motivational, or you could choose a theme of productivity and very focused intention. So riastory.com, you can /journals, you can learn about the different ones. They also make a great Christmas gift if you're looking for something for someone in your life that helped them get a jump start on their 2020. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fearfully and Wonderfully Me, a podcast designed to help you increase your influence, develop your leadership, and maximize your results. Today's episode is a bonus episode. As we wrap up the end of the year, wrapping up 2019, I wanted to just do a bonus episode, just a quick episode out there and throw out some of the best books that I read in 2019, because I know if you're listening to podcasts, that tells me you are a growth-oriented person, and I read a ton of books. It's one of my personal growth books. One of my personal growth goals this year was to read 50 nonfiction books. And so I wanted to, because I read quite a lot of books, obviously, I wanted to share probably what were my top 5 books that I read for growth and different dimensions of life this year. Because I know if you are a growth-oriented person like me, I know you're always looking for book recommendations, because there's so many books out there, so many resources, but time is precious. And so I'm always looking for really good recommendations on what's the best books to invest in that are going to help me develop myself in different areas. So I wanted to share that with you. First and foremost, this is one of the most recent books I read called God is Just Not Fair by Jennifer Rothschild. And I read this book a couple of weeks ago. We were at the beach, and it was one of the books I had ordered and I saved up to take to the beach because I knew that we would have some downtime. And I love to take really good thought-provoking books on vacations like that, so that, during the downtime is a really great time to read and reflect, because a lot of times when we're reading a book, we're kind of busy and on to the next thing. So I like to save some of the best books for those vacations where I know I'm going to have some downtime and I can really think about what I'm reading and how it applies to my situation. And I really enjoyed Jennifer Rothschild's book, God is Just Not Fair. And you could read the title a couple of different ways. You could read the title as God is Just Not Fair, or you could read it as she intended it, God is Just Not Fair. And she talks about, from her perspective, she's blind. She started to go blind as a young teenager, and the disease that she has in her eyes progressed as she got older. So she's now completely blind. And she's written a lot of books, and she talks about her faith from the perspective of, she's prayed diligently over the years for God to restore her sight, but that prayer hasn't been answered. And she talks about that from the faith perspective. She talks about it as Christians that, God is just, right? But life isn't fair. And so sometimes our prayers aren't answered and we don't always know why. But it was a really good book to help remember things from that perspective of, when we start to question God, and I know we all do it, it's easy to say that God creates all things and causes them to work for our good, and that's promised to us in the Bible. But it's so much more difficult to say that when you are going through, a season of hardship, or, maybe your son or daughter is sick or has cancer and you're questioning God. You're like, God, why would you let this innocent child go through something like cancer or leukemia? Or maybe it's personally, you're going through a season, maybe you've lost a job, or you're going through a tough divorce, or, whatever it is. If you're facing a season of adversity, it's so tempting to question God and to doubt God. And, I know that we tend to withdraw from God a little bit. If we're not intentionally leaning in to Him in those difficult seasons, it's easy to withdraw, because then we start to doubt, then we start to question, or maybe we even start to blame God for our circumstances. So I really appreciated that book. It's one of the most recent books I read. I really just appreciated that faith perspective. So I would say that of the books I read this year, that was the best book on faith and having that perspective of hope and resilience in a season of hardship. I also appreciated just her personal story. She talks quite openly about some of the challenges she's faced and learning to navigate from, a sighted person to a blind person. And, we don't always consider some of the struggles that people who are challenged in different ways face in our normal everyday society. So next book, I think that the best, just overall inspirational, made me feel good book that I read this year in 2019 was Everybody Always: Becoming Love in a World Full of Setbacks and Difficult People by Bob Goff. I really, really just loved this book because, number one, his stories were just phenomenal. He shares a lot. He shares a ton of stories in the book, and sometimes they're off the wall experiences that he just has that insatiable approach to life, like the time when he promised each of his children they could choose an experience. I think it was for their 12th birthday. And then whatever they chose, they would make happen. And one of them chose like hiking. It wasn't Mount Everest, but it was a mountain. And so they have to train for months and months, and then they go do the hike. But it was a promise he'd made, and so he kept it. And so he just has that almost a always yes approach to life, I think, where he just seems to be open to what God brings and the opportunities that causes. And he talks about, especially as Christians, how are we being love, or how are we setting that example of love, right? In a world full of setbacks and difficult people, how are we living that out every day? And I really loved that book, like really good quotes, really good takeaways and nuggets that I walked away with. In fact, I enjoyed it so much that as soon as I finished it, I immediately ordered, actually it was his first book that he wrote, Love Does, by Bob Goff. But as soon as I finished Everybody Always, I went on right away on Amazon and I ordered the book he had written first, which I had not previously read. And I enjoyed it too. But Everybody Always, just a really good inspirational stories, some great stories of faith, but some really good teaching points for me to take away on increasing my influence with other people, and how our behavior every single day can help us do that, or it can prevent us from doing that. One of my favorite quotes from that book, he says, "Quit talking a big game and just go live a big faith." And I really appreciated that, because I know sometimes it's easy for us to talk about having faith, but are we actually living it? I think back to really in probably 2015 when Mac and I had, we had both had stopped working as a consultant in lean and process improvement, and I had left the hospital, and we were both working toward, developing the speaking business and leadership development and training. And 2015 was really probably the second or third year we'd both been into it, and it was just a tough year of trying to build this business. And we started it with no network and no books at that time. And we really had no clue how difficult and how rewarding it would be at the same time. But in 2015 was the year that we said, either we are all in and completely committed to the path that God has called us, or we're not. And if we're not, then we need to make some different choices. Maybe that means finding another job and going back to work in the corporate world. Or if we are completely committed, then we need to be all in. And we decided we were all in. So that was the year we sold our house and moved to a little apartment. We'd already downsized really our lifestyle, but really setting that commitment, saying we are completely 100% all in. And we sold the house that we had bought, and it had the pool and the hot tub, and we really thought, man, this would be the house that we would have forever. But we realized that if we were 100% committed to the journey God had called us, that living in Auburn was holding us back, and living in that house was holding us back. And I think for me, that was a test of faith, because it was a test in saying, okay, Lord, am I more committed to this house and material place to live, or am I willing to step out in faith and really live that? And so we decided we're all in, we're going to live that. We sold the house in just a matter of 2 days. I think it went on the market on a Monday, and within 2 weeks, we had settled on a contract, completely negotiated everything at full asking price. It was just a God thing, as I like to say. And to me, that was the year not only that it tested our faith, but also it really God opened so many doors when we were willing to say, okay, we're 100% committed, we're all in, let's go. And so I love that quote, because when I think back over the years, to me, that was the year when I certainly was willing to say, okay, if I'm going to be obedient and live faith, that was the year that I really could see that just lived out in our lives. Number 3 book that I read in 2019, and as you can see, these books are all in different categories, but probably the number 1 top leadership book that I read in 2019 was The Dichotomy of Leadership by Jocko Willink and Leif Graben. In that book, Jocko talks about, and if you've read his previous book, Extreme Ownership, that's also good. But this year I read The Dichotomy of Leadership. And I really appreciated his perspective in that book about the different dichotomies that we face as leaders. And even if you're not in a formal level of leadership or a formal position of leadership, you face a dichotomy as a parent, right? I mean, you face a dichotomy as a leader of helping your team members be successful and developing them, but you also face the dichotomy of making sure that you get results for the organization, right? And that's the dichotomy. We have to care about and love our team members and develop them, but we also have to balance that with getting results. And sometimes that makes hard decisions, right? Sometimes you care about that person and you want to develop them, but they're not the best person for the team. And sometimes you're doing them a favor by helping them move on, but that's a dichotomy. Because as a leader, we care about them, but we have to balance that with getting results. And we face some of the same dichotomies as parents, right? We care about our children, but sometimes that means disciplining them. Even though we do care about them, it's not something that we want to punish them, but we do have to discipline, right? So I really appreciated The Dichotomy of Leadership. Great stories in that book that really helped you see the different dichotomies. He breaks them down and helps you see them. And always just a very inspirational book when you hear some of the stories about the challenges that they faced being, in some of the different environments overseas, and all the different perspectives that we probably don't think about day to day that our service members and our veterans go through, right? So really good. The number one leadership book on leadership that I read in 2019. Next, but certainly not least, number 4 was option B, Facing Adversity, Building Resilience, and Finding Joy by Sheryl Sandberg. And I really didn't know her story until I read this book. It was one of those books that I didn't plan on reading. Typically what happens before we travel, especially on a plane, I go on my library and I find some really good books for my Kindle, and then I go on and download them so that I can read on the airplane, in airplane mode on my Kindle. And this book was one of the ones that popped up as a new ebook in the library. And I really did not know her story. I just knew a little bit about that she was affiliated with Facebook. And so, but this book sounded interesting, right? Facing Adversity, Building Resilience, and Finding Joy. Those are three topics, obviously, that I get passionate about because every single one of us face adversity. So I downloaded this book for a trip, and I had so many good quotes from this book on, finding joy and being resilient. But the one thing that I most appreciated about this book is she shares her story of losing her husband, and they had young children, and it was really a difficult season to go through. How does she, be resilient, not just for herself, but also for her children, and being a parent and facing the loss of your spouse. But the one thing that I really appreciated her perspective of was she talked about pre-traumatic growth. And we've heard the term of post-traumatic stress and things like that, but pre-traumatic growth. And when I thought about it, yes, there is no doubt that when we go through something traumatic and we are able to overcome that, we grow from that experience. There is no doubt. Kind of the fire you go through, it seasons you a little bit, right? Or firing it's like the potter firing the clay pot, and it comes out stronger and harder. And there's no doubt that trauma and adversity refine us and help us grow when we're able to overcome those experiences and be more resilient. But she talked about pre-traumatic growth, right? Growing ourselves and our character before we face that adversity, before we get into those traumatic experiences, because we know they're coming. But if we are intentional about growing ourselves before we face those situations, it's much easier to navigate them. And I loved that concept because I'd never really thought about it. I've always talked about, intentional growth and growing not just our competency and our skills, but growing our character. But really, when we are intentional about doing that, because we know there are going to be challenges, it helps us navigate them more successfully. Henry Cloud says, character is the ability to meet the demands of reality, right? And so if we are intentional about growing our character before we have to meet that reality, it's much easier to overcome that. And I love that concept. I love the concept that we can grow ourselves, character and competency, but particularly growing and developing our character, right? Our personal growth today is going to help us be more resilient tomorrow. And so I loved that concept. And last book that I wanted to share with you that I read in 2019 was a book called Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. And if you are an entrepreneur, if you have a side business or a side gig, if you have a service, or if you're in the service industry, this is probably one of the books that I got the most value out of from that perspective, because he talks about positioning yourself and your brand in terms of a story. And he talks about that from the consumer or the client's perspective. And so he walks you through a couple of different exercises on, really asking you to think into what What challenges or frustrations does your brand or service or product resolve for your customer? And I'd never really thought about it from that perspective, but definitely if you are in the service industry, if you are in a professional environment, if you're an entrepreneur and you have a brand or a product, this is one I definitely recommend. It really made me rethink how I positioned myself. It's easy to say, well, I'm a leadership speaker, but really, what challenges do I help my client overcome? What frustrations am I eliminating? What problems am I solving? Because that's a powerfully different perspective, right? Not just looking at it from our perspective as a provider, but looking at it from the perspective of someone who might need your product, right? They need to know easily and quickly what it will do for them. And I got a tremendous amount out of his book, Building a Story Brand. He's actually got some worksheets in there, some really great information to walk through. Now, like anything, it's only as good as you applying it, right? Any of these books that I've talked about today have some really great quotes and some really great perspectives, but they're only useful when we apply them. So there you have it. My top 5 books, and each one's a different category, but my top 5 books that I enjoyed or got the most out of from 2019. I've actually not quite finished my list. Every year for the last several years, I've set the goal of 50 nonfiction books for the year. And I've actually been thinking about revising that goal for 2020, because I do want to make sure that I'm growth focused and not just goal focused. And my worry is that if I continue to just focus on 50 books a year, am I too tied up in the number? Or am I intentionally choosing reading material to help me grow? So I need to really think through that in the next couple of weeks. But all that to say, I still have one more book to finish before the end of 2019. I'm actually reading The Power of Habit. And I think I've talked about that in an earlier podcast. Haven't finished that book yet, so it's the last one I got finished. I got about 2 more weeks to finish that up, and that will wrap up my reading list of 2019. And I hope you've enjoyed this. Just top recommendations of books you might want to consider pick up that I found a lot of value. Until next time.